Thanks for joining our session. My name is Sediko. I'm the founder and the trustee of the Progressive Socio-Economic Investment Institute. It is a public benefit trust carrying on activities focusing on public benefit activities. Our main focus for these days is on webinars on various topics. We invite speakers that are experienced around those topics to come and share their experiences with us. Let me indicate before we start that I am here representing Progressive Socio-Economic Investment Institute. I'm not representing any other organization that I might be affiliated to or employed to. So the views that I'll be raising here are the views of Progressive Socio-Economic Investment Institute and not the views of any other institution. Colleagues, the social labor plans and community trusts are established to ensure local ownership and local socio-economic development of mining communities. These two policy approaches were also created to foster a relationship or to provide mining industries with the social license to operate. There are recorded challenges when coming to community trusts. Yes, there are best practices, but there are also bad practices that have been recorded. There are situations where there are allegations of the monies that are given to trust being squandered by those who have been elected or those who have been appointed to lead those trusts. There are also reports where some of the trusts are doing well in developing communities. Colleagues, today we've got one of the scholars who have written a lot around community trusts. He's a professor at the University of Free State, and his name is Professor Sethulego Matebesi. We are so fortunate to have you here, Professor, today to share with us your views and expertise on social licensing and mining in South Africa, reflections on community trusts. We will give Professor Matebesi an opportunity to present, then we'll take questions, and at the end, we'll request one of the scholars that I'll introduce at the end to give closing remarks. Without a waste of time, I'll give it to you, Professor Sethulego.
Thank you for that introduction, Sediko. I would just quickly want to share. Is it possible? Can you allow me to share my screen? Hello, Sediko.
Yes, Prof. Let me make you a co-host so that it can also be easier for you to share your screen. You can share your screen, Prof. Are you winning, Prof?
Yes, I am winning. Can you see it on your side?
Yes, I can see it on my side, and I'm sure colleagues can also see the screen.
Okay, thank you. No, good evening, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be able to present at today's session, and also thanks to Sediko for the introduction. I have been asked to present on the whole issue, the notion of social licensing and mining in South Africa. Let me just check whether this is the we want to. Yeah. This is actually the right one. Yes, on a very difficult topic, and I must start. I just wanted to, as a form of background, so that I think the colleagues who are part of this webinar should actually understand where I come from in terms of research in the mining industry. I primarily focuses on social movements in South Africa. We've focused on what people, South Africans, call service delivery protest, but it's what we as academics actually refer or define as community protest. I received funding for a 3-year project in 2013 to 2015, and that particular study, which focused on it was a comparative study between your predominantly black communities and your predominantly white communities. Remember, in South Africa, your white communities do protest, but they protest, and especially targeting local municipalities in the form of withholding rates and taxes. It's the so-called ratepayer associations in South Africa, and what we call your so-called grassroots civic groups or organizations or consent groups in South Africa. That stream of research led to a book published in 2017 called Civil Strife Against Local Governance. Now, very importantly, as I was conducting this study, and the study focused on areas such as Jagersfontein in the Free State, Grabouw in the Western Cape, Kuruman in Northern Cape, and other, communities in South Africa, it was actually clear that I need to do a follow-up study, because in your mining towns, it was clear that it is not only service delivery issues that contribute to the protest in those particular areas, but it was also the underlying conflict between communities and the local mines. And that led to another project that led to a book which was published last year called Social Licensing and Mining in South Africa. And also part of the first research, there was also another issue which I could not, and I will come back to the whole notion of social licensing, because it's actually part of the presentation, of my presentation today. But also another main issue that emerged, that emanated from the first study, which I strongly believe that I need to follow up, was the whole notion of what I call, I've already published an article on this, what I call transactional activism. And it's the whole issue about social movement leadership. We all know what happened in Vicksburg, the so-called Tatani case. I could trace throughout South Africa that instead of dealing with the fundamental grievances that communities have, what our local leaders will do, and sometimes even at provincial and national level, they will offer selective incentive to these core leaders of the protest. And that only mutes the protest for some time. And that's why in certain areas, you will always find this vicious cycle of protest, because you haven't dealt with the fundamental aspects or grievances. And sometimes you don't need to solve the grievances as such, but at least there should be a concerted effort to deal with that. And people should believe and they should trust that the leadership or the institutions are actually geared towards solving that problem. And now, if possible, I am planning to publish yet another book in 2 years' time on this particular issue, which also emanated from the first books. And I think this, in a nutshell, gives you an overview of where I come from in terms of that. I also have a mentor here at the University of the Free State, Professor Lochna Mare. He just told me that, if I keep on focusing on protest, it is not a problem. But the moment if I focus on the mining industry, I will have the scope of work for the next 20 years because of the nature of mining, the nature of the conflict or the dynamic conflict between communities and mining companies. But I think it's also very important to note that this whole notion, all the studies that I conduct, all of them are actually underpinned by the notion of trust in institutions, and trust in local actors. Now, coming back to today's presentation, the focus will actually be very briefly on the study was conducted in 4 provinces, in Limpopo, the Free State, the Northern Cape, and I used the Royal Bafokeng Development Trust in Rustenburg as a so-called model case study. Because if you look at all the other 3 case studies, the Baroka Bangkwana, also a traditional community, Jagersfontein in the Southern Free State, a very small, your typical small town, a mining town. And I think most of you will perhaps also know about the John Dowl or Haitziwi Trust, community trust in Kuruman. Now, the purpose of my study or the presentation was actually to evaluate the governance structures of these communities development structures, but also very important to examine how the commitments stipulated in the agreements are actually translated into tangible local development initiatives, and also just to reflect on the local contestations. And that I would have to apologize in advance. I don't have much detailed slides that will follow, but I will just share some of my insight about the case studies. I would also like, as a point of departure, because I think this direct quotation is actually saved the crux of my presentation. And this is by McGill in a article titled "Risk: Why Do People Do What They Do?" Now, firstly, I need to declare that I'm not an academic, nor have I studied any of the social sciences or human behavioral fields such as psychology, nor have I gone down the MBA route. I am a dyed-in-the-wool mining engineer with a master's degree in engineering science. However, what I do have and what I want to share is over 30 years experience working with, managing, and leading people, which is often a far more variable and volatile commodity than the material that I was trying to mine. Now, if you look at this quotation, as I've indicated, we may design policies. And this has actually been the case because I use a PET dependent approach when I conducted the study. And it was clear that successive generations of political and even social actors has made decisions that still have a bearing, whether negative or positive. But if you go and look at some of the policies that have been formulated that needs to deal with the whole issue of social acceptance, you can still see that South Africa is still battling in terms of that. But I am focusing on community development trust that have actually been voluntarily being initiated by mining companies. And this is actually quite novel because in other countries, uh, communities actually have to demand mining companies to set up these community trust. But now, if we look at the ATOC uh, case, ATOC, which is close to Burgersfort in the Northern Cape, this was a very interesting case. Perhaps also I have to emphasize the point that the whole notion, there's a huge a debate about whether it is possible to obtain a social license. And even before I started to embark on this study, I've been warned, and I also spent 4 months in Australia. And the Center for Social and Mining Research, the directors there, if you look at Diana Kemp and John Owen, every second academic article that is published, their name feature, and they were also totally against what I tried to embark. But I was adamant that just as we have a social contract, the notion of a social contract, I was adamant, and I'm still adamant, the moment if any mining project does not have the blessing and the social blessing of a community, conflict will be inevitable. There will be a vicious cycle of conflict. But even with that, there are many problems with that. Now, if we look at the ATOC case study, we all know that ATOC is also governed by, the chieftaincy or the traditional authority. But the problem there is that you've got 22 villages, and all these villages combined. But what happened in the past was that the communities were highly divided, and each village or every second village actually had a representative group. And that's why the mines actually send the community back to say, but can't you organize yourself into a single representative organization or unit? And this is exactly what happened. And then the Baroka Bangwana community engagement community committee was established, and the issue there was around the Bokoni mine. We know that the Bokoni mine was closed a couple of years ago, but this happened as a result of the labor unrest, industrial action by workers. But in this case, the community has actually been calling for the reopening of the mine. But since that process has been started, there's been huge concerns around how the mine and the state are actually dealing with certain key matters where the community needs to be taken into confidence. And this has led to a series of protests in this particular area. And I will come back to this case. The second case, it's the Jagersfontein community development, the Tumeleng community development case in the southern Free State, in a very small town. Also very interesting case study, where for the past couple of years, almost every year there has been 3 or 4 very violent protests that are targeting the local community development trust. And I'm just going to be very brief. We should know that Jagersfontein, it's not a full-scale mine, but they're only mining the dumps. And very interesting, there was one gentleman from Kimberly, who indicated, and even if you read, you do some research, you will find that there has been a high court case here in Bloemfontein where he challenged the current consortium because apparently he, way back almost 10 years ago, he tabled a proposal to mine the dumps, and he was willing to give the Jagersfontein community a 50% stake in his company, but that never materialized, and there have been a lot of court cases around that. But even before the consortium were given the go-ahead to mine in Jagersfontein, the Rupert Foundation donated 20 million. This was all over the media. And the bone of contention in the Jagersfontein for the past 10 years has been around the lack of feedback about how the 20 million has been spent. Now, the community, and if you look also at the structure of the community trust, is that they are community representatives. And when I started with this project, it was actually some of the trustees that approached me to say they have serious concerns. But what happened afterwards, and these are not thumbsuck, I've got credible evidence, was that the trustees each year at the end of the year, they will be flown to Cape Town, and suddenly also they're getting a monthly stipend of, at the time of the research, it was 3,500, and suddenly the attitude changed. But even the leaders who were leading the protest in this community. I had two gentlemen for the past 2 years who have been in the forefront of the protest. And I also shared my concerns about communities who embark on protest, that at the end of the day, the moment when money are tabled, then suddenly they change. And this is exactly what happened while I was in Canada in 2019 to write up the final chapters of the book. I got hold of an agreement between the two core leaders of the protest in Jagersfontein, which stated they now should act as conveners between the mine and the community, and whenever there are conflict, they are the ones who should mediate. And I also have it on record that each one of them are actually receiving 7,500 per month. And these are some of the issues that cut across some of these case studies where some mining companies, because some mining companies are really doing well in terms of the whole notion of social licensing, engaging with communities. But we also have a situation where some mining companies are using underhanded tactics to try and deal with issues of social licensing, with issues of ensuring that at the end of the day, communities are benefiting from the mining projects that is happening in their own localities. And then the second last case is Kuruman case, the John Taulo Gaitsewi Development Trust. Now, also very important in this particular case study, the community leaders complained that for more than 10 years, there have been no consultation by the development trust. And what they did in the case of the Kuruman, in Kuruman, there is a super trust, and apparently the super trust is being managed from Johannesburg, and they did consult the manager of the super trust, and that was on a Friday. The manager drove down to Kuruman on the Saturday to consult with them, and actually asked them not to publicize some of their concerns. But a major concern from the side of the community was that if you look at the structure of the John Dowle Haidziwi Development Trust, was that you will find that it is always the case a former mayor, a former municipal manager, and even former local councillors who are serving on this trust. That is not necessarily a problem because perhaps these people do have expertise in managing local issues, but it also becomes a huge concern when trust structure or the management of community development trust only focuses or centered around certain individuals there. There has been violent protests in Kuruman, and this also led to the so-called no road, no school protest in that particular area. And this is an issue that has been going on. Although there are evidence of community halls that have been built, local, as in the case of the Jagersfontein case, where some students have been sent to tertiary institutions. They've been provided with bursaries and all that. But the bone of contention have always been community engagement and also ensuring that the communities actively participate in these community development trust. Yeah. Now, I think the most well-known of the three of the four cases is definitely the Royal Bafokeng Development Trust, and I must also emphasize that I was fairly impressed with how I've been received. Many people warned me also that I will not receive the warm welcome when I engage the traditional authority, but contrary to that, that was not the case. And I think what is well known is how, unlike in the case of or in the case of the Limpopo case, it were traditional institutions were actually used to ensure that at the end of the day, the communities do participate in the decisions. Oh, well, this is something that is questionable, and there has been huge concerns from the ANC Youth League to say that actually what is happening is that decisions are being taken elsewhere, and during the so-called lekgotlas, the communities do not have a choice, but they have to buy into this. But based on the research that I've conducted, there has been evidence that an attempt is at least made to try and engage the communities, and the whole notion also of diversification, which plays a huge role in making the Royal Bafokeng Trust what it is today in terms of that. But what also stood out for me in terms of the Royal Bafokeng Trust, if you compare it with all the other cases in terms of the structure, and actually the cases, you can't even start to compare that. But I think what is very important that really stood out for me was the main issue of the buy-in by the local communities. In the other cases, there has been concerns that it is actually the traditional leaders that are also being used by mining companies. I think they find the gap between the community and all that, and they try to exploit that to their own advantage. But also there have been also credible evidence to say, to map how communities actually struggle to engage. And I mean, in the case of the Limpopo case, once again, if you just look at the many trips that local community, high unemployment, high poverty levels, each time had to take a bus to DMR in Pretoria just to go and raise some awareness about that. These are some of the concerns that these communities have actually been experiencing. Now, in terms of, in conclusion, it is very important to know that community development trust actually encourage social licensing, but concerns about local actor involvement in governance remains a serious concern. And as I've indicated, uh, social licensing can be maintained by trust, but it can also be threatened by lack of trust. And that is why, even if social community development trust are regarded as instruments to implement uh, development in certain areas, they have also become the source of conflict because around issues of governance and issues of lack of consultation. But I've also found that, as I've indicated, protests have become full-blown transactional for core leaders of these protests, where citizens are actually operating as vendors for the interest of local leaders. I do conclude that the complex engagement between money and companies and communities reflect a value shift from attaining collective benefits for the groups towards protest leaders that are inherently predisposed to pursuing their own interest. And there's a pressing need to consider what norms and values these protests will transmit to future generations, especially if you look at a situation that in some of these mining areas, each time there is a protest, schools are also being used as bargaining fodder. And especially if you look at what happened in the Northern Cape case in Kuruman, where schools at one stage were closed for more than 8 months due to concern around the lack of proper roads in that. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof, for your presentation. You have indicated various things, but the main thing that you have indicated is that there are few community development trusts that are functioning effectively for the benefit of the communities. You have indicated also that some of these community trusts, the key beneficiaries become the trustees who are serving within this trust. You've also indicated, Prof, that within some mining communities, some of the protests are fueled by the leaders for their own benefit, not for the benefit of the communities. One of the concerns that you have raised also, Prof, is that when there are these protests, other things like schooling are used as a bargaining tool, whereby protesters will close schools to say, if you don't address our needs, therefore there will be no schools. But the key issue that we're discussing today is about these community development trusts that are established by mines. Thank you so much, Prof, for your insightful information. We'll allow colleagues that are participating in this webinar to raise questions, inputs, or comments. I'll go for 3 hands in the beginning, and then go for another round of 3 hands. Feel free, colleagues, to express your views in relation to the reflections of community trust. Over to you, colleagues, those who want to go first, ask questions or comments. to the Prof.
Hi, Sediko.
Hi, Becky. You can go first.
Thank you very much. One thing that I would, thanks for the insightful presentation, Prof. The interest for me lies within the books that the Prof has actually written. Is there a way of getting them? Because on Take a Lot, they're only on ebook. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky. Any other comments, input, question before I give over to Prof to respond to Becky?
Thanks. It's Paul Kapelis here. Thanks very much for the presentation. I'm just wondering if you've given any thought to alternatives to community trusts, given how the risks and issues associated with them that you've raised. Have you considered any alternatives for ensuring that communities benefit from mining in the area which they're hosting? Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Paul. Any other input, comment, question? Prof, you can respond to the two questions, and then we'll take other round of hands. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you, Sediko, and thanks to Becky and Paul for the question. The issue of the book, I would have to, just before today's session, I also told Sediko I still need to engage the publisher to see how one can actually get a hard copy of the book, and I will try to organize a few, and then I will just inform Sediko so that he can then, obviously inform his networks about the availability of the book. Now, Paul, to be honest with you, it's a very, very good question, and perhaps something that I can focus on in future, because I still believe that I still have some areas to cover in terms of community development trust in South Africa. But definitely, I think the crux of the matter is what is currently happening in our country. It is actually a good model. And I've mentioned I'm not overly critical of mining companies, because you should remember, I focus on these community trusts that were voluntarily established by mining companies. But the problem actually starts there, because the moment when you want to establish a community development trust, the question also that raised in a scholarly literature is the issue of who do we regard as a community, and that's where the problem starts, because it's sometimes only the most vocal ones that ultimately become part of the community development trust. But I will definitely pay attention to this. But I strongly believe that with the current structures, if you've got a legal structure, there should be consequence management, and this is something that we're currently lacking in South Africa. I don't understand how does that happen. If I take a 10 rand which does not belong to me, there should be consequences, but unfortunately that does not help. But one can definitely look at best practices that is happening internationally for that, but I will definitely pay attention to that in future.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much, Prof. Other comments, inputs, questions?
Hi, Sediko.
Hi, Peggy.
Yes, now I can ask questions or make a comment in terms of community trust. My first interest was within the books.
Thank you so much, Peggy.
Yeah. Prof and the colleagues, I would like us to ponder on some points. Why is it that Royal Bafokeng is successful or is perceived to be successful? Is it a matter of, now let's go back to where Royal Bafokeng is. It used to be a Bantustan in initial stages. Kuruman as well used to be in Bophuthatswana as well. Now, what I've actually gathered, I stand to be corrected on this, is that in my analysis is that Royal Bafokeng, because they've got the title deed of the land, they own the land, therefore they become more successful and therefore more buy-in, other than the other chieftaincies that I've been exposed to who do not own that land. Might that be a problem that we need to look at? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky. And colleagues, the questions are not only directed to Prof, it's for all of us. Those who have got some suggestions and response to the questions, feel free to come in. Any input, comment, question from colleagues?
Evening, Mr. Sediko and colleagues.
Evening, Fikile.
Thanks for the presentation, Prof. My question is only one question. The question is that when it comes to community development trust, are we only speaking about landowners, or are we also including host communities in that?
Thank you so much, Fikile. The last hand or last input, before I give over to Prof and other colleagues to respond. Okay, Prof, over to you.
Thank you once again for the question, Sediko. If you don't mind, I also received 3 questions from Mandisa, so I will at least cover 2 of them immediately after I've responded to the questions, if you don't mind.
Don't mind.
Yes. Well, the issue of it does. I mean, the issue of Title D does play a huge role, and I mean, as I've indicated, it's going to be very difficult to try and compare Royal Bafokeng with all the other trusts in terms of scope, but there are inherent characteristics that I strongly believe that most of our community development trusts, irrespective of how small, whether it's at annual turnover, it's only 1 million. The basic point of departure will always be accountability and serving the purpose for what they have been established. And that is not happening in most of the other case studies. By now, I don't think Royal Bafokeng would have been a successful case study as it is globally if, for instance, management structures or the governance structures were not in place, and the whole notion of consequence management. We know there have been challenges, there has been issues, but if you look at how they've been going about their business, it's a totally, completely different way, where you find a situation that you've got a community development trust that has received, as in the case of Jagersfontein, where attempts will be made to try and mute the views of the local leaders, sending students to universities, which does not even spend a fraction of that. So it's an issue of also how these community development trust approaches and manages their business. But I think it's also a question that will relate to Paul's question, as if we do propose alternatives, how do we see and speak to this particular issue of title deeds? But also, if you look at other cases internationally, the most successful cases has been those that owns the land, and I don't think it's necessarily about the ownership. It's just that they can amass financial gains much quicker, but they also have proper systems in place. Coming to Fikile's question, community development trust is not only about targeting or ensuring that landowners benefit from that. It is an expectation, even by law, but then it becomes your legal expectation via social labor plans. And here we refer to voluntary development trusts that have been initiated by mines or communities. But expectation is that mining communities should benefit from mining operations in their area, because at the end of the day, whether we may even disagree on this note, but there is a price to pay. And sometimes it's a heavy price that communities have to pay, because they can pay a price, they pay the price with their life, or, the health risk of being exposed to mining projects. Now, I think that concludes the two questions. I would just read what Mandisa, she sent an email, and her question is, if the founding company gets complaints from communities that there are no impactful and sustainable projects in the communities, yet the monies are disbursed to the community trust, what is the responsibility of the founding company in enforcing provisions of the trust deed, or what should the founding company do? And then the second one, I think it relates to that one, but then the last one is, how do you balance interfering in the running of the trust and looking at the independence of the trust in the light of the two questions above? Now, yet again, it's a simple response to that, a very difficult questions, and it's the whole notion of, once again, proper governance structures. I think it will also be naive, and I know mining companies, perhaps once they have donated the money, they will not want to get involved, because then it will seem as if they are becoming a referee and players. But I don't think any company with its salt will donate 20. And in the case of the Kuruman, the John Taule Haitziwi Trust, once again, this is not Tamsak. For one financial year, the mining companies, and this is several mines in the Northern Cape, donated 105 million. Now, 65 million in the annual report of the Super Trust indicated the money was spent on special projects. Up until today, we don't know. The community, we're trying to find out, but what do you mean by special projects? And I think that's where I strongly believe that mining companies will then have to intervene and say, but we can't keep on donating and investing in communities if we don't see, tangible benefits. Because at the end of the day, if they don't play that role, communities are not necessarily just going to target the community development trust. In fact, in most instances, the communities target the mining companies, and that's where the problem comes. And that's where I strongly believe that mining companies also has a role to play, because they do have the capacity to assist the community development, especially during the early stages, to try and provide support to community development trust, and then they can later withdraw. Thank you, Sediko.
Thank you so much, Prof. Let me take the last round of questions, because we'll be closing at 7. We're left with 7 minutes. Other last round of questions or inputs? Last round of questions or inputs or comments?
Hi, Sediko. This is Mamutle. So my question is, I know that Prof has shared that there needs to be proper governance structures in place. And of course, integrity plays a big part in that. The communities should not fall prey to being bribed or swayed by the mines to take money without benefiting the communities. But my question here around this is, what other insights has he picked up or can he share in regards to potential loopholes in the structures of the trusts that prevent the progressive development of the community?
Thank you so much, Mamute. Prof? But before you go on, Prof, can I take Valdemir Valdemir Mohale. Mohale?
Yeah, thank you, Sediko. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Mohale.
Yes, I've got a question and I think a comment as well. I think my first question is that I heard the prof talking about a book. So I wanted to know where and how do we access that book so that we can also read it. And then the other one is just a comment, because I heard someone asking about why Bafokeng are actually successful. So I thought I should guide him to, there's a source material I think that is also available on the internet. I think the book is called The Business of Being Bafokeng. It's brilliant research material from Susan E. Cook, who I think touches a lot of aspects that I think makes Bafokeng much more successful than other communities. You know, I'm from the community of Baboa Mokhala. I'm a royal family member there. You know, so I just came in late on this particular engagement. I wish to engage more, but I think there will be an opportunity to engage more on this particular topic if we have another chance to engage. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohale. From our institute, definitely for sure, if colleagues want to have a second engagement on this topic, we'll organize it and engage Prof and request his time, and also look at other speakers that can join so that we can have another engagement on this topic. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you, Sediko. Very briefly, Mamotle, if you look at all the research that have been conducted in South Africa about community development trust, there are actually 6 principal observations that cut across through all these case studies, but I'm just going to mention a few. I've already mentioned the issue of governance structures, but I've also emphasized the point that some of these trusts are structures that are independent of mining operations. And then secondly, though the trusts are conceived to be representative and participatory, the issue is the unilateral decisions. Because in some community development trusts, there is evidence of regular engagement with the communities. But then once again, if you just go deeper, and you will actually see that most of the decisions are actually being made by the trust, and they just provide feedback. It's not a case of active participation by the community. And another major bone of contention is the role of local municipalities, because remember, some of the projects that these community development trust wants to embark on needs to be aligned with the IDP, integrated development plans of a local municipality, and that creates huge problems around that, and bringing on the municipality as a set of problems of its own. And one does not always want to be overly critical, but we all know some of the challenges at our local government system in South Africa, but also you know, the fourth one is also the unfortunate geographic reality that mining dependent local municipalities are concentrated in what I would call your peripheral or your poor provinces. And there have always been issues like, and it's not necessarily, as I've indicated, there are traditional structures that are operating well, but that in itself also has become a huge concern, the whole notion of that. These are some of the loopholes that one have to look at, but also to ensure, but how does these community development trust contribute to long-term socio development projects that at the end of the day will benefit the local community. So in a nutshell, these are some of the other alternative issues that community development trusts have to look out and actually close the gap. It's not only about governance issues, but it's also to take into consideration the cycle of integrated development plans, because you can't build a stadium if it does not have a buy-in from the local municipality. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
Mamute, do you want to come again?
Yes, I actually do have a question that came up from what he said, is then that how do you then separate the benefits, the community benefits that are channeled through the local municipalities between the people who are landowners and the general communities?
Difficult one. You know what some community development trusts do? They communicate via annual or newsletters. The case of Jaggersfontein, that was also a case. But I mean, once the community development trust has built, or that obviously that will become part of its communication structure. The community will know during the engagement with the community, it is the duty of the trust to inform the community that for that particular project to be able to be implemented, permission needs to be sought from local municipality. And it is also incumbent on the leaders of the structure to inform the community about the duration, because sometimes, seeking approval can take some time. And at the end of the day, the community will definitely know that. The projects have been, there have been ample examples in the case of Kuruman, where the community know, if you go to a certain hall, the name of the community trust is actually there. So the community will know some of the projects that have been embarked on by the community development trust, although it had to come, unfortunately, it needs to get the buy-in or approval of a local community, local municipality.
Thank you so much, Prof. Other question inputs before we close? All right. Thank you so much, Prof, and thank you so much, fellow participant. I'm going to request a person who has been in mining for years. He's got a PhD from Wits University, and he's just completed an MBA looking at the establishment of the management of community equity trust, South African Mining Charter 3 compliance. He has just completed the MBA, looking specifically on the establishment and management of community equity trust as a form of compliance to the Mining Charter 3. He'll give us the closing remarks, and he's here in his individual capacity, not representing any company. He's here as a scholar, also as an activist. And over to you, Dr. Fred.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akolote, and thanks for the introduction. You are making now me feel smaller, but after this presentation, I realized that I didn't do much on my research with the presentation that Prof has just indulged us with. And thank you very much, Prof. I wish I had this presentation before I complete my research on community trust. I think it would have been good marks for my research. But this is critical. We will know that mining has progressed from nothing at the issue of.
Dr. Fred, we are losing you in terms of network. Just get a good area and come back. It seems like we've lost Dr. Fred. Let's hope that he'll come back.
And in that, we have realized that the community, some of the community started establishing a trust. So the Mining Charter 3 has made this topic very relevant, because now we know that if we were to establish a new mine, or if we have to renew the mine, we have to give minimum of 5% to the community. And the community trust has been seen as a relevant structure to do that. So I do hope, Prof and Mr. Rakolote, that we will have more engagement regarding this issue so that we can learn and enlighten our communities. And thank you very much for all the effort, for the presentation. Thank you very much, Sediko, through your Progressive Socioeconomic Investment Institute. Please, thanks for all the participants and all the questions regarding this issue of community trust. And I hope, Sediko, that we will have more of this, as one of the participants has alluded, that we do need to be enlightened regarding this issue and strengthen the governance and strengthen our community trust, because there will be more of this community trust. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fred. What we need to do, Prof and Dr. Fred, the three of us need to sit down and come up with a plan. Maybe if there is a community somewhere in one community in the Eastern Cape or Limpopo or Mpumalanga or Northwest or KZN that wants to know more about community trusts in related to mining, they can contact us. Then we can give them this session, and just to assist in ensuring that these community trusts that are established for the benefit of community, at the end benefit the community. It's very sad to find a situation whereby Prof was talking about around 20 million rand being paid and people being flown to Cape Town every festive season, while the community at large is not benefiting anything. It should be our responsibility for all of us who are a little bit enlightened to assist communities in ensuring them they are capacitated in managing their trust. Before I close, Ndate Mokhale, I'll give you a minute, then I'll close officially. Ndate Mokhale, your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Thanks, Sediko. In terms of what you're saying, I think I would recommend that, our area, the Bapova Mokhale, will be a brilliant case study for Dr. Fred and for Prof and yourself to actually, start to educate more in terms of these community trusts, because I think our community is one that is, generally and also in the news, that is mired by these issues that you're talking about in terms of community trust and beneficiation that needs to cover everyone, including people who are in the area that is governed by the local municipalities and so forth, including the area of Marikana, which is now a global phenomenon and a center to what is actually going to happen past the killing of the 37 miners and the incident that happened there. So I think it will be a brilliant case study, and I think also because the BAPO is purported to essentially be one of the richest traditional communities. Second, maybe to Bafokeng, or maybe first to Bafokeng. So I think maybe just as a recommendation, I think that I would gladly pose this with some of the members of the royal family to say, perhaps we need to have a lesson to the team there, as you have alluded, to see how maybe we can carry this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mogale. What I did, I shared my details on the chat. And those who would like to invite us to their communities and have a proper session, please feel free to contact me. Then we can take it offline. But colleagues, thank you for participating. This is one of the sessions that we host as an institute. We'll be having other sessions on other topics on the 11th of the 11th. On the next week, if I'm not wrong, we'll be having a session on research methodologies. And please check my Facebook page, Sediko Rakolote, then you can get the invite to our session. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Dr. Fred, for availing yourselves to come and share your expertise. And colleagues, have a lovely evening and take care. There's still COVID around there. Please take care of yourself. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you. Right.